Hey, I'm Tyler, and I'm the youth pastor here at Moses Lake Alliance Church. And I'm glad that you have decided to be part of one of our fellowship communities. And I'm glad that I get to interact with you, even if it is through a video like this. So I wanted to start today's message with a question. What is the craziest true story that you've ever heard? And I'm talking about one that just so crazy and has so many ridiculous details that you actually question whether it's true. And I've got one for you. This is truly nuts. So prepare yourself. So I was in high school. I had gone on a summer mission trip to Mexico with my youth group, and we were going to build houses for people that needed homes. And so we brought some construction guys with us, and one of the guys that was on my team was leading us in the building of the house that we were doing for the family. And one day, as we were working, he started telling us a story about when he was younger in his construction career. And he said that he had just poured like a concrete slab, right? And so it had dried a little bit, but wasn't fully dried when a wife and her husband, for some reason, decided to drive right on it. Okay, so he goes up to the driver window, the wife was driving, and he says to her, "Ma'am, you just messed up my concrete. What are you gonna do about it?" And she kind of goes off on him, like, "I'm not doing anything. You're going to have to figure it out," and blah, blah, blah. I'm pretty sure there was some profanity intermixed in there. And so he looks at the husband in the passenger seat and says, "Sir, are you going to let your wife talk to me that way?" And so the husband says, "She can talk to you however she wants." So this guy, his name was Ron, walks around to the passenger side, pulls the hammer out of his construction belt, opens the door, digs the hammer into the guy's head, pulls him out of the car, and starts beating on him with the hammer. And I just remember thinking, what? That is ridiculous. I mean, just so insane that I really had a hard time believing it was true. And to be honest, I don't even know if it's true or entirely true to this day. Now, Ron had a purpose in telling us all that, but he said that he, was arrested and did his time and he learned from it and all that. But it's still one of those things that it's like, I just don't know if that was completely true. And it kind of reminds me and makes me think of like when I was a kid and I was in church, I'd hear these crazy stories in the Bible. And some of the details really made me question, is that really true? I mean, was there really a talking snake in Eden? Did David really kill Goliath with a slingshot? And did Jesus really mix dirt and spit together, rub them on a guy's eyes, tell him to go jump in the pool so that his blindness would be healed? I mean, it's just crazy stuff. And it kind of can make you wonder about what the Bible really is, if it can be trusted and if it's true, and how are we supposed to understand all of these things, and do they even apply to our life today? Now, last time you met, you started a conversation about the Bible. You talked about how the point of the Bible is to help us know God better, and how everything in the Bible points to Jesus because he is the exact image of God. He's our reference point for understanding who God is. That's how God chose to reveal himself. And since the Bible is intended to help us know God better, it all points to Jesus. So when the Bible is confusing, Jesus is kind of like putting on 3D glasses at the movie theater. All right, without them, if you're in a 3D movie, everything's blurry and you're seeing different colors. But when you put them on, everything becomes clear. And Jesus is like that. He helps us see God more clearly. And he helps us see the whole story of God and humans more clearly. And this is great, right? But there are still some verses, some stories, and some commands that are just weird to us. Especially since we're living 2,000 years after the fact, a lot has changed in that time. So what are we supposed to do with those passages? How are we supposed to understand them? And maybe we should even be asking the question of, are the ones that I think I understand, are those passages that I'm actually understanding correctly? Sometimes there's a disconnect between what we're told about the Bible and what we actually experience when we read it. I mean, we're told that the Bible can change us, that it's super significant and relevant to our lives. It can help us and guide us. But when we take the time to read it ourselves, it sometimes can be quite confusing. So is there something we're missing? Is there a different way to approach the Bible? Is there a way for what we don't understand to be explained? And the answer is yes. Understanding what the Bible actually is and what it's meant to be helps us to get the Bible in a way that we maybe never have before. So let's start with the basics. The first part, the Old Testament, tells about how God created everything. And he wanted people to be with him and to rule with him. But people messed it up. And their relationship with God was messed up. And they kept messing it up over and over and over again, even though God showed them grace many, many times. And this all points to the fact that God was the only one who could fix the relationship, who could fix the problem. And so he did. And that's where the New Testament starts. Right? The second part, which is the New Testament, shows how Jesus was the solution. It shows how he was the sacrifice that made it possible for mankind to be restored to a right relationship with God. And it also shows how Jesus' followers then took his teachings and his way of life and applied them to their specific context and their specific culture. In short, the entire Bible is one unified story that points to Jesus. The Old Testament looks ahead, the New Testament looks back, and then also ahead to when Jesus returns. And this is important to understand no matter where you're reading in the Bible. But with those two parts, there's a lot going on. And it's a big book, it's not your typical book, right? The Bible is actually 66 different documents arranged intentionally. There are poetry books and books that include laws for the people of Israel. There are books about Israel's history and wisdom books, and those wisdom books contain lots of advice. There are letters, lots of letters written to different people in different parts of the world, in different circumstances. So when we read the Bible without understanding that we're actually reading one of 66 unique documents, we're actually missing a huge piece of the puzzle. We're missing context. Sometimes it's helpful for me to think of it as I'm not reading the Bible, but I'm reading a document found in the Bible. I'm reading a letter written to a specific group of people. I'm reading pieces of wisdom that a father has written down for his son. Or I'm reading a history book recording everything that happened, or maybe not everything, but specific things that happened to a specific people group at a specific time in a specific place. Right? Or I'm reading a song written to God by someone who knew him well. Or I'm reading an eyewitness account of someone who actually hung out with Jesus. And all of this while keeping in mind that these documents are inspired by God himself. They're not just man-made. My point, context matters. It changes how we read everything and how we understand everything. So as an example, let's look at a well-known verse, Philippians 4:13. It says, "For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength." That's the New Living Translation. Now, with no context, this verse could seem like we just stumbled across a magic genie in a bottle, right? We might think, without understanding that verse and the surrounding context and who's writing it and all that, we might think that, hey, I can dunk a 10-foot basketball through Christ who gives me strength, even though I'm 5'10" and can't jump worth beans. You might also think that, hey, I can pass my Spanish class and that test that I have coming up without even studying through Christ who gives me strength. Or I can get multiple dates this year through Christ who gives me strength. With no context at all, this sounds like a formula for living the life of our dreams. But does it mean what we think it means? It might look good on a coffee mug or an Instagram post. It might be inspirational. But I think there's a little bit more to it than what typically is thought of Philippians 4:13. And this is where context helps. So let me give you some. This was a letter written by Paul. And it was written to the church that he had planted in the ancient city of Philippi. So it's kind of like if you were to imagine that maybe I were to move away to a different city, right? And then I would write a letter to you guys here in Moses Lake. It'd be kind of like that. And I would want that letter to be read to everyone, right? That's kind of what's going on here. That's how letters were written in the first century biblical world. But there's more. Paul wrote to the Philippians from prison after being arrested for his faith, for preaching the gospel and telling people about Jesus. There were some that didn't like that. And in this part of the letter, Paul was thanking the Philippians for their financial contributions to him and to his ministry. And in this part of the letter, he was reassuring them that they didn't need to feel obligated to give anymore, but rather he was saying, thank you for giving. Your giving has really helped and has spread the gospel and has been enabling him to do good things for the kingdom. And so Paul let them know that he'll be okay whether he has a little or a lot, whether he's in jail or out of jail, whether his belly is full or empty. And so in this section where we find Philippians 4:13, Paul is really talking about contentment, being content with whatever situation he finds himself in. He's letting the Philippians know that he has figured out how to be peaceful and content in life no matter the situation. So how can Paul find contentment even when he's in jail, probably unjustly, and with very little going on for him, very little good going on for him, right? And that's where he says, for I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. See, Paul was dependent on Jesus. His close relationship with Jesus gave him the power and the strength to persevere and find peace even in the hardest situations. So the point isn't so much that, hey, I can win this football game because God is on my side, right? That's not really what Paul's saying here. It's more like, because of Jesus, I'll be okay whether we win or lose. Whether life is going my way or not, I can turn my attention away from those circumstances and put it on Jesus and find peace in him. You see how the verse changes when you understand the context? It helps us understand it in better and more clear ways, right? It helps us know that there's something that we can do with that verse now. Think of it this way. Context creates clarity. So without the background and the context, the bigger story of what's going on in the particular passage that we're reading, we're just guessing at the meaning of that scripture. And don't miss this, okay? If what we said last week is true, that the point of the Bible is to know God better, it's too important to just be guessing about what the scripture means. If we miss the backstory, if we miss the big picture, we run the risk of missing out on understanding the God who is behind it. So, instead of being overwhelmed by what we don't understand in the Bible, let's just look for what we can learn in the context. And so much of it is right there for us if we just pay attention to the details. The next time you come across a verse that you don't understand, try asking these questions. 1, who wrote it, and who was it written to? Sometimes a passage doesn't make sense to us because we just don't understand who the author was and who they're writing it to, who the audience is. Start there. And the cool thing is that many Bibles have like a little introduction page before each book of the Bible, and that gives you some of that information. So you can do that. You can also find a lot online, so just be careful with some of what you find online. So that's the first question. Who wrote it and who was it written to? The second question, why was it written? Philippians in particular was written to remind a group of people that they were loved by God and Paul, and to encourage them to keep following Jesus even in difficulties and struggles. So when you can figure out the why that's behind the passage that you're reading, you can have a better understanding of the context and the meaning of what is being written. It can make things more clear. Third question, how does this apply today? The whole Bible is important, don't get me wrong there, but not all parts of it are equally applicable in each moment of every day of your life, and that's okay. Sometimes there are details that were specific to the culture and context of when it was written, right? Sometimes there are pieces of wisdom that can apply directly to the way we live today. And sometimes it's something in between, right? And so figuring out how does this particular passage apply is really important. And honestly, this is where a lot of Christians disagree with one another. But we have to figure out, how do we apply this today? What's the principle we can extract from this and put into practice in our lives? The Bible does have the ability to change our lives. And it has that ability because it reveals who God is to us. God is ultimately the one who is changing us. And so it's important that we make sure we truly understand what God is communicating to us through the Bible by understanding the context. If we miss the backstory, if we miss the big picture, we run the risk of missing out on understanding the God who is behind it. So what if you and I stopped looking at the Bible with all sorts of confusion and rather looked at it with courage, knowing that God gave it to us to understand who He is? It's meant for us to understand, right? So instead of throwing up our hands saying, this is just way too crazy to be true, or I don't get it, so I'm not even going to bother, right? Instead of doing that, what if we approached it with curiosity and put in the effort to really try to understand the context of what's going on? What if we took the Bible seriously, even when things don't make sense immediately? Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.